Guitar?
No, it's Sash's.
I'm presuming.
My
Okay.
capo though.
How many of you can play a musical instrument? Okay. How many of you was it like super easy the first time you started? Okay, so don't answer the next questions. If you're a natural, that most of us don't have that gift, right? Let's ask the other piece. A sport. How many of you have a sport that you really enjoy playing? Like basketball or volleyball or something else? Okay. What's that?
I don't know if mine counts as a sport or not.
If you're which?
I don't know if mine counts as a sport. I do martial arts.
Golf isn't a sport.
Yes, I would count martial arts for sure. So here's what I want you to think about. Those of you that either have developed some expertise in music with a musical instrument or with a sport, or I would count this as well, learning a second language, right? If you had to work at learning a second language, right? So think about, let's just concentrate for a moment on sports, because I think that seems a little bit more, common. When you first started playing your sport and you had to do all the drills and learning the basics, learning the fundamentals, was it fun?
No.
Okay, there's a mixed answer on this one. Was it often exhausting and sometimes boring?
Yeah.
Right? Learning something new. A lot of times when you're learning the fundamentals, it's kind of boring, it's kind of exhausting, you have to do the same thing over and over again. But after you put in the time, did you find that it became easier to do the same things? After you did your drills, after you put in that time, did you maybe even start to go practice your sport in your free time for fun? Is that maybe something you do now, that when you have time, you organize a pickup game, or you do something that yeah, I can move that out of the way for you. So what at first was difficult, after practice, became initially easier, if not easy, right? You were more consistent in being able to either hit the basket or whatever your sport is, right? And over time, in fact, you found that you would enjoy doing that thing that at first was difficult, and at first was maybe even a little bit boring, right? Think about playing a musical instrument, right? Let's get particular. Piano, anyone? Anyone play piano? Okay, so okay, close enough. So we'll pick on one person if we may, right? When you were first learning your scales, learning to play the scales, right? What was it like?
Difficult, especially when you have to learn different ones with sharps and flats.
Yes, with the sharps and the flats, all the black keys, right? Yep. And then as you put in the time, what did you begin to notice about your experience at the piano?
You gain muscle memory. It gets easier.
Gets easier.
After you practice a lot.
Yeah, so you became more consistent, made fewer mistakes, or less often.
Yeah.
Do you sometimes play piano just for fun today?
Yeah. Not today. But
Not today, but I mean.
yeah.
So think about that experience of learning something new, whether it's a musical instrument, whether it is a sport, right, or whether it's a foreign language. That's a lot like what it is to be human, right? We need to learn what it is to be human. We need to develop and grow, and Christ gives us so many invitations to help us to grow in our humanity. And one of the points that we'll draw out today in there's a cord, maybe, is there an HDMI cord that I could plug into the laptop to
Do we have?
project with? Just a standard.
There's
IT
one.
department is on it.
Do you want me to run and
We'll
grab
have to
it?
request that you have one in the computer room.
Nope, these are the ones from a different Promethean board, but
Sweet. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. IT Department. We appreciate it. So that's part of what we're going to be getting at today, right? Now imagine, as we think about this, right? Imagine if, let's go back to piano for a minute. I missed your name, can I?
Rebecca.
Rebecca. Do you mind if we draw you out a little bit here? Imagine if when you were first learning to play piano, you thought, it's never going to change. I'm always going to be playing scales and chords, and my teacher's upset at me, and I don't enjoy this, right? Imagine if when you looked into the future, that's all you could visualize as far as what being with the piano meant, right? So what we'll be talking about today is a certain way of thinking about the gospel and Christianity that imagines that the early difficulties that we have in our walk with the Lord are all we're ever going to have. That we can't really hope for growth or deepening, or that our friendship with Him will become so close that we'll really enjoy our time with Him and the adventures that we undertake together with Him and with our fellow Catholics and Christians, right? So, all right, so are we plugged in? Excellent, excellent. Okay. And we can get the projection from here. Or we should be able to anyways. Let's see. Where is the setting? Okay. Every time they change the so we're talking a little bit about learning curves in part, right? Every time they change the software, you know, it just gets a little bit more interesting when they move pieces that I know where they are. So let's see if, yes, that's what we want, okay. So I'll sort of tie myself a little bit to the table here so we can get started, unless there's a music stand or something like a music stand, in which case I can get in front of you a little bit more. So maybe a small introduction is in order at this point. Your director, the SASH director, right? I forget your title, Chris. Forgive me.
That guy.
That guy, Chris, right? Is right. I teach at a school where we train psychologists and counselors who also are very comfortable with the faith, because a lot of people, when they have speed bumps in life, let's say, or in their marriage, right, would like to be able to talk to somebody who gets them, right, and who, if the person wants to bring faith into the conversation, thank you so much, they can do that. All right, we're gonna see here. Be a little bit easier to. Well, we'll get the cord back in here. This is a very temporary. Should be a temporary setback. Let's try again. If we have to, we'll just put it back on the table. Okay, so this is a. If there were a stand right here, I think it would hold it. Let's just try. Okay, that should work. Still in the way for you all. So this is in part what we're gonna talk about today. And I co-teach in the psychology program the philosophy and theology parts, right? So I'm bringing you some of those pieces that we're talking about today. So brief intro. My wife and I are often at the 11 o'clock on Sundays. If some of you go there, you may see us with our family on the left-hand side. We love Sacred Heart Parish. My kids will often talk about Father Lundberg as the potato chip priest or the Nutella priest, right? Because when we were first getting to know him, he would tell those great stories about like everyday experiences, right? And so in part, that's what I hope I can bring you a little bit of, is to talk about those everyday experiences in a way that relates to our faith, right? Like sports, like a language, like a musical instrument. And so what we're going to do today is we'll go through three parts. Basically, we'll say, what is this counterfeit Christianity that we're talking about? What does that look like? Why would we call it counterfeit, right? Secondly, why is it fairly common? You may meet a lot of people who think this way about their faith, right? And about what it means to be a Christian or a Catholic. And then we'll bring out three practices that you can do easily, right? To live that gospel more fully. In a way to immunize yourself, if you will, against a counterfeit Christianity, right? So let's maybe start this way. What makes something counterfeit? Think about that for a moment, right? What is a counterfeit? Say I have a counterfeit $100 bill, right? Counterfeit means what? Yes, please.
Kind
kind of like a cheap knockoff of the real thing?
Like a cheap knockoff of the real thing. Perfect. So it's something that promises the real value, but doesn't deliver the real value, right? That would be a good description of counterfeit. And so one of the things that I've learned is that when the FBI or other federal institutions are training people to spot counterfeit money, they don't spend a lot of time looking at the counterfeit things. They spend a lot of time having them feel actual cash. And they get them really comfortable and familiar with what's real. And when you know the real things better, it's easier to recognize, like, oh, something's off here. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't seem right. Right? So as we look together at two different ways of thinking and talking about Christianity, which we'll look at on our next slide, that's part of what we're getting at. I will spend a couple of minutes pointing out differences, but what I hope mostly to do is help with that, with emphasizing the powerful value-delivering aspects of the gospel that the counterfeits don't deliver, right? So here's just a kind of a simple table. I'm sorry for those sitting on the corner. You can move if you need to. So let's look first. Let's just look at what the gospel reveals about Christianity. Like what are some of those basic pieces, right? And then we'll compare that to a very common counterfeit Christianity that you'll run into a lot, right? In some ways, we all pass through the counterfeit version because in the early parts of growing, we have to do those repetitive things that are kind of boring, that are not very exciting, on our way to growing towards greater freedom and greater joy. So in the gospel, we have a mainly positive view of the person from Christ, right? Has anybody seen the first season of The Chosen? So most of you, maybe half. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's a great series. Really helps to visualize the apostles and many of the followers as like real people like us, right? Before they got to the part where they were on pedestals and made statues in churches, right? And I think the actor who plays Christ, who plays Jesus in that series, does a really good job of being like very authentic and really being interested in every person, right? So a mainly positive view of the person where human fulfillment is part of God's plan, right? So you think about those early chapters in Genesis where it says God made this or that, and then it says, and he saw that it was good, right? Each one of the days he says that. On the sixth day, after he makes man and woman, it says he saw that it was very good, right? So the human person is fundamentally good. Yes, we're fallen. Yes, we have sins, right? But that's not the deepest truth about us. That's the part we need help with. So that emphasis on the positive, the primary positive view of the person. A second point is that morality begins externally. We need laws, we need rules, we need to be required to do certain things initially. The same way that when you drive down the road, you need lines, right? So that you don't drive off the road. Most of you, half of you can drive, maybe? Okay, maybe driving's not the best analogy. So, our 2-year-olds in our house, right? Don't touch the stove when the burner's on, right? Why do we say that? Because we don't want them to have fun? No, because you can get a kind of serious injury from the stove, right? Or don't run out in the road when the cars are there, and because you're so short, nobody can see you go between the cars until you're already in front of the cars going by, right? Those rules are for the sake of growth and life, right? So this idea that morality, the way that we live, our behaviors, begin externally, and then as virtue develops, as our muscle memory for doing good behaviors develops, right? Then slowly that becomes internal. I like that expression, muscle memory. I actually use that in the classes, and I think of whoever our martial artist was over here. You learn things in your muscle memory because sometimes you learn things first with your head, and that's good. But if it's a sport or it's something that involves your body, you want it to get down into where you can do it naturally just by wanting to, right? You can perform those moves, or you can perform that way of playing. And so it's the same thing with our moral life and with gospel living. Which, by the way, just as with a musical instrument or a foreign language or learning a sport, the better you become at that sport, the more free you are to do that thing and to enjoy doing that thing, the less you have that ability. I can't play the piano. I can play maybe 5 notes, right? I'm not free to sit down at the piano and have a pleasant time, right? But Rebecca is, right? Because she's put in the time and the work. In the same way, our growth in the gospel leads in that direction for us, right? So third, in this way of understanding the gospel, and this is one of the things Christ is very clear about in the Gospels, that who is God? God is a loving Father. God is a Father who cares about us enough to send help when we need it, right? That's a core part of what Christ brought us, right? And that means that, in the words of Pope Benedict, each one of us is known and loved and awaited by God. God is like the dad who, you guys haven't done this yet, you haven't left the house after growing up, right? And then dad's like, please come home for Thanksgiving because I want to see you guys again, right? Let's gather around the table and have a great time as a family. That's, in a way, the way God thinks about us when we close our eyes for the last time. He hopes we're coming home to him because he's looking forward to that, right? That's a way of understanding who God is that Christ brought, right? In this language, there are some strict commands. We do have the commandments, but that's not all there is to the gospel. There are lots of things where Christ invites, right? He invites the rich young man. He invites the apostles, right? Those weren't commands. Those were invitations. And so, the true gospel, it's a good news story. This is a pathway to freedom and to joy that we're invited to walk, right? That's the gospel that we've been given. Contrast that to a common misunderstanding and a way of thinking about Christianity. I say Christianity because in the circles where we work, we're speaking to all the Christian denominations, right? But this is Catholicism, right? I'm not selling you something that isn't the Catholic faith, right? And you can see that through the pieces here. But this is a common misconception that mainly people are not good, people are mainly bad, and are mainly selfish, right? Are we somewhat selfish? Absolutely, right? But are we primarily selfish? That's a different story, right? But a lot of people you'll meet have that view of the person, right? Secondly, this idea that morality or the rules are always going to be outside me. I'm always going to be restricted by morals, right? Rather than that they're a source of transformation for me. And this is an opportunity for me to grow, to have a fulfilling life. But I need to do some work. I need to do some growing, just like with a sport or a foreign language or learning a musical instrument. Typically, in this view, God is an arbitrary master or a tyrant. He's like this policeman that doesn't want people to have a good time. You may have friends that have made comments like this, right? I had a friend who was in a barber shop once, and somehow in the chair getting his hair cut, somehow the topic of religion came up, and he said he was Catholic. And the barber said, "Oh, Catholics, you guys have a lot of rules," right? That's a very kind of a negative view. That's not a path of, oh, you have a lot of discipline. You're on your way towards something great. You're willing to put in the work, right? That's more of a restrictive view of things. And so in that view, God makes up these rules. They're not sort of the rules of life, if you will. Of how do you live a good life? Let me tell you, right? That's what Christ is bringing. That's what God has given us. And so in this counterfeit Christianity, typically the language will be almost always strict commands. You have to, you must, you're required, you're obliged. Which isn't to say that the gospel doesn't have some commandments, right? But that's not all we're about. In this way of thinking about Christianity, that's typically the main emphasis, right? That this is a place with lots of restrictions. And so, kind of the bottom line on that is, it's a question. This is good news? Question mark? No, this is a bad news story, right? And yet, often, this is what people think, about what the gospel is or what Christianity is, right? You'll meet that, right? And as I say, a lot of us, we need to go through, I don't know if we often will go through a phase like this as we're growing up, because there's a time where we have to do the hard work. All right, I'm going to take a time check now because we want to. There's a couple ways we could go deeper on this, but I'm just going to take a look and see. Let's do this. Let's take a look here. So earlier I talked about, when I was talking you through the examples of sports and foreign language and a musical instrument, of basically 3 stages that we have in our experience, right? There's a beginning stage where things are more difficult and painful. There's a stage which we could call progress, where things are less difficult, easier, but we're not there yet, but we can recognize we've made progress in our work. It's an in-between stage where things are less painful and we sometimes enjoy doing the thing, right? Shooting free throws, running drills, just playing a pickup game. But the goal is stage 3, right? The stage of mastery, where those experiences are much easier and have a lot of joy, right? So if you remember, I have to be careful with date references, right? How many of you know who Mother Teresa is? Does that name mean anything to some of you? So some people would look at her life and say, wow, she has a really hard life. She and her nuns care for the poorest of the poor. They literally go out into the streets and they find somebody that's laying in a ditch and everybody else is ignoring, sort of like who's the guy going down to Jericho? The story of the Good Samaritan, right? Where there's this guy that's been beat up by robbers and left in a ditch. He's left to die, right? Like, that's their whole work, is finding people like that in the places where they are and caring for them. And it's often very difficult work. It's often very dirty work, because these people were left to, their infections were left to go, and sometimes they would have to remove parasites from their arms, little worms, whatever. Really difficult things. But they're actually living a life with a great deal of joy because they know why they're there. They're happy that they're serving somebody with their life, but that's because they've done a lot of growing, right? And so what looks really, really hard to the outsider, and is hard, right? But they've grown and they're able to do these things, right? So in the same way, we may have different heroes in our lives that we think about, like, oh, I could never be like that. That person's amazing, whether it's an Olympic athlete or whether it's, Father Lumberg or whoever it might be, right? That you admire. Realize that the growth, it's a pathway of growth, right? And this is the bottom line that I really want to emphasize. In our way of thinking, growth is an increasing journey of freedom and joy. Like, the more muscle memory we get in our living out the gospel, right, and the closer that we live to the Lord and just being able to talk to Him about what's on our heart, like, the more comfortable that gets for us and the easier that gets, right? And often we won't even realize how much more free and more joyful we are until somebody around us points it out, right? So this is a great hope that I hope you can carry in your hearts as you think about your own growth. And as you think about the young people that you're helping in all your time at the camp, right? You're helping them to grow in different ways as well. So just a few points about this way of experiencing growth and the way of thinking about things. In this perspective, this authentic way of thinking, rules are my friends, right? They're there to assist my freedom, right? You drive on the right side of the road. Why? Because somebody doesn't want you to be able to drive anywhere on the road? No, because it's safe. If you drive on the right side and the other guy drives on the right side on the other way, then you don't hit each other when you're driving on the road, right? So rules as friends that help and assist us. Also, just like with learning a sport or a musical instrument, as we talked about, initially, often, we experience a rule or a way of behaving that's asked of us is something maybe negative initially, right? But that as we repeat it, it becomes more positive, right? Okay, so let me see, then thinking about our time together. I think I want to show you these two visuals just because I just think they're helpful as visuals. So the negative way of thinking about moral growth, of thinking about what we learn from the gospel, is that we become smaller. We're somehow reduced, right? And that morality, the gift of the gospel, is something that restricts us, right? That it somehow gives us a less good life, right? Like that we have to live a smaller life, right? As opposed to that it's actually a transformative journey, that we're called to live a greater life. And in order to do that, we need to grow, right? When we first, I'm just going to come back to basketball again, right? When we first learn how to dribble, and we first learn how to do the drills on the court, we don't know very much about it. It's early for us, and we have to put in the work in order to be able to get to a place where we can more consistently actually hit the basket, right? Life is like that too. We often have dreams and goals that we hold in our hearts, right? And things we'd like to accomplish in life, or things we'd like to do or to be. And as we begin to move in those directions, we find, oh, I can't quite get there yet. I need to grow. I need to acquire skills, right? I need to, maybe I need a coach or a mentor, right, to help me really bring my best game in life. And so it's for the sake of this richer, fuller life. Christ said, I have come that they may have life and that they may have it to the full, right? You've probably heard that expression from the gospel. And that's this idea that he wants to help us grow. And he wants to help us grow in a fully human way, right? In a way that expands who we really are. So let's turn to the question of 3 practices that you can do to, in a way, to immunize yourself against a kind of counterfeit Christianity. Because when we have hard times, right, sometimes we forget the good times that we've had in life when we go through a difficult season. And so one of the first practices that you can do, this is a great practice, keep gratitude lists, right? I would recommend, make one list that's like your top 10 to 25 things in life that you're grateful for, right? Like my wife is on that list, my kids are on that list, graduating from the college that I went to is on that list, working at the job that I'm at now is on that list. Whatever those are for you, and from time to time, maybe on Sunday or once a month, just look at that list for 5 minutes and remember the good things that God has already done in your life, right? That's a really good immunization, to remember the things that you're grateful for, because if you're at all like me or like most of the people that I know, what will naturally occupy your time if you don't stop for some gratitude is all the problems and the things you want to fix or the things you want to solve or the next project you have to take care of, right? That's totally human and totally normal, right? But what can happen is we end up getting focused on the negative, on the stuff that isn't finished yet, the stuff that we still have to do, or the stuff that somebody wants from us, right? And then it's hard to harbor a sense of joy and to remember, this is an amazing part of our faith, right? God made all of physical creation as a gift to us, as a sign of his love for us, right? That's part of the theology of the body. That's part of what John Paul II has helped us learn about the meaning of the creation narrative, right? So if you have favorite foods that you can pull off the tree from time to time and eat, God was thinking of you when he made that. And we can authentically think that, right? I really like pears, and I like figs, and I like what else can I pull off the tree? Well, I also like lots of vegetables. But that's a way of thinking about creation, right? And recognizing that creation is meant to be a sign of God's love for us. That was the first meaning of creation. That we have a Father that cares about us, that wants us home someday. And so having a gratitude list, like a lifetime top 10, some people I know like to keep, every morning when they get up, while they're having their cup of coffee or whatever you guys drink when you first get up in the morning, you might not need coffee yet, right? just write down 3 things that you're grateful for, or maybe at the end of the day, right? So that's a really good practice. It's easy to do, and it's surprising. It's been surprising for me in my life what a difference it makes. I've been through seasons where I forget to pull out my gratitude list. And I'm like, why am I so crabby all the time? Like, why am I always upset at people, right? And then I go back and remember, usually after confession or a spiritual direction session, oh yeah, I'm not starting my day, I'm not starting my time with the Lord with thanking Him for all the good things that He's done in my life that I already have, right? Things that I already have. And so, again, this second piece, bring that with you when you talk to God, right? Thank Him for those people and those situations or the gifts that you've received in your life, right? Number 1, He appreciates it, right? And number 2, He may want to talk to you about some of those things. And when you bring it up with Him, that's an opportunity, right? He may want you to really develop your gift in math or your gift for teaching or your gift for, playing piano, whatever it might be, right? And maybe that will lead to other things in life. So that's my number 1 top thing ever. If you could only do one thing, that would be my invitation to you, right? Make a gratitude list and look at it, at least once a week, I guess I would say. Minimum once a month. I try to look at mine every morning. When I start my prayer, when I start a meditation with the Lord, I try to take like a minute and look at 2 or 3 and just to feel grateful and to thank Him. And I have found that makes a really big difference in the way that I relate to Him, right? And in the way I relate to people around me too, because I'm in a better mood usually when I'm going around that way. So that's number 1. Number 2, this one I think is also super helpful, and many of you are on the younger side of where Chris and I are at, so this can be helpful as well. Visualize your future. Think about what kind of a life you would like to have, right? Write a paragraph about it and bring that to the Lord. Lord, this is what I think would be a great life. What do you think about that? What would you add, right? Would you adjust one of the ways, one of the items that I have on here, right? Do you want a family? Do you want to be married and have a family? Do you want to have a certain kind of job? Do you want to work in a certain part of society, right? Do you want to do certain things for hobbies? Those are really, really helpful, and it will make your prayer come alive more too, because then you're not just sort of going through motions when you're praying. You're also bringing to Him, Lord, I think you've put these things on my heart. Help me have the energy to pursue these things if they're hard, right? Help me to make good choices so that I can move in that direction. Those are super helpful things to do. Also, when you do that, there's something implicit about you don't bring your hopes and dreams to somebody that you think is against you, right? So it also helps immunize against this idea that God isn't really on my side. He's not really interested in my own life and in my growth, right? When you can bring Him your hopes and dreams that way. Maybe you want to write 5 paragraphs. I mean, there's nothing magic about 1 paragraph, but it's easy. So that's why I recommend it, right? So that's an idea for practice number 2 that you could easily do. I know a lot of people that actually do this, right? In fact, I know people who will write what they call a vocation statement, where they write 1 paragraph about their relationship with God. They write 1 paragraph about, like most of them are married, so it's about like my wife and my marriage, right? What do I want that to look like? They write a paragraph as a parent, right? As a father or as a mother, how do I want my relationship with my children to be? And the 4th paragraph they typically write is either about their job or their community involvement, right? How they want to show up in those places. That's sort of a version 2.0 if you don't want to just write 1 paragraph, right? That's just to give you an idea. A 3rd practice, and then we'll take some time for questions. This one is, I don't know how best to talk about this. Choose to do little actions every day to make other people's lives better, right? It costs us so little. I'll give you some of my favorite examples. I really like to hold the door open for people, right? If somebody's coming in from getting groceries at the store, I'll hold the door open. Or when I take my wife on a date, I like to open the car door so she can get in, right? It's a simple little thing, When I'm at the university and there are students coming along or something, I get a lot of joy out of that. That may not be your thing, and that's okay, right? But think about what are some little everyday practices that you could do just to make other people's lives easier, right? And pick things that don't cost a lot, typically, right? Because then you can do it often, right? Compliment somebody on their really nice, like, what do you call these green things that you guys are wearing? You know? Lanyard. Compliment them on their really nice lanyard, you know? It's a joke, but you get the idea. On their tie, on their shirt, on their hair looks great, whatever. It costs us so little to notice good qualities in other people and just say that, right? It costs us so little. Take out the trash without being asked. That's highly rated in my house, right? Because nobody likes to take the trash out. But again, little things that are not complicated, that are not hard to do, that you could do to just, and here's the key. I'm not encouraging you to do these because you should do them. It's so important to do them, right? I'm inviting you to see these as a way to live out your genuine belief in the goodness of other people and that you can make a difference in the lives of others. You can do little things to make somebody else's life easier, right? Once in a while, a student will come in at the university and they had a hard time on a test or an exam or whatever, and they'll, sometimes it's like, you know, they might have to retake a class or something, and they get a little emotional and they start to cry. So we keep a box of Kleenex in the office next to the place where we talk to the students, because it's a kind thing to do if somebody is a little emotional, you know, and they're feeling teary. Offer them a tissue, right? I mean, again, whatever it might be. I'm just giving some examples to you, right? You can pick what those are. Help your neighbor with the groceries. Help them mow the lawn if you like that kind of thing. You may have an elderly neighbor. You may be good at mowing the lawn. Maybe it's easy for you, right? Whatever it is. I don't care. This isn't for me. This is an invitation for you guys, right? So you can think about those opportunities. So to summarize, we've talked a little bit about what counterfeit Christianity looks like, what authentic Christianity looks like. We've talked about the journey of growing, where you're going to be more free and have more joy as a result of the growing and the muscle memory, so to speak, right? And we've identified 3 practices of just everyday things that you could do. You could start doing them tomorrow, probably without too much trouble, right? That will be a kind of an immunization against a sense of counterfeit Christianity and a way to really live your faith, right? And none of this means, you know, that I'm not a big fan of confession, because I love confession. I think it's great. But those particular practices are ones you can do on a very frequent basis that you will find make a difference over time. In 2 weeks' time, I promise you, if you started doing those things on a relatively daily basis, you will notice the difference in your life and the lives of those close to you, right? So enough talking on my part. This is a time for you guys, if you want, to ask questions, to tell another musical instrument story. Just kidding, but you know. And Chris, any other guidance that you have for us here, please?
Questions?
Open floor, open mic. Sir, I see your name is Staff. Oh, that's not a name badge. I'm sorry.
My name is Jared.
Jared, nice to meet you, Jared.
So with the counterfeit Christianity, how exactly did that emerge, or like did that enter people's minds, and why does that happen?
Very, very, very good question, actually. If you were taking one of my courses at the university, we would be spending 2 hours on this topic. The main reason is this, right? No, I mean, it's an important question. The main reason is this, as far as I can tell, without giving you a bunch of history of philosophy. The 3 stages of growth start with discipline, right? It can happen in a person's life either because maybe their mom and dad don't get along really well, or maybe they have a bad experience with a pastor or somebody, that they can get stuck in the discipline stage, which is the stage of recognizing, like, you know what, there are certain rules that I need to follow. There are these fundamentals of the game, if you like that language, right? That I need to learn how to do, and it's usually work, and it's often negative as an experience, right? The key that we found, and if you were to read Father Servais Pinker's Sources of Christian Ethics, sorry about that. Where did we go here? If you were to read his Sources of Christian Ethics, which is where I'm taking this teaching from, he would say the biggest difference about the discipline stage is if you have a teacher or a coach that is helping you learn the fundamentals of the game, who is, they can be stern, but you clearly recognize that they're on your side, right? They're not against you. They're not here to make your life difficult. They're here to help you play your best game, right? It could be a teacher, it could be a parent, it could be a mentor. Then it's easier for you to perceive the rules as your friends instead of your enemies. But if you have a very harsh coach that belittles you in front of the rest of the team, that always notices your mistakes and never praises you for the things that you do well, it's a lot easier to fall into this way of thinking, right? Now imagine you're a person that fell into that way of thinking, into that negative way of thinking, and you grew up in that way of thinking, right? You never got to the stages of growth and joy, right? And then you became a teacher, and you taught what is a person like, what is human life, and how do we think about things. There was a I'll give you one name. There was a I guess he was a theologian, really, William of Ockham, Ockham, who basically said the Ten Commandments are only the Ten Commandments because God decided He wanted to give us those rules. The first commandment we know is you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole mind, and your whole soul. What he said is, if God had wanted to, He could have made the first commandment, you will hate the Lord your God with your whole mind and soul and heart, and then that would have been the right thing to do, right? That was his perspective on who God was and on the nature of the Ten Commandments, that they were purely arbitrary, right? Speaking psychologically, probably he had a life with a lot of arbitrary negative rules, probably, right? I don't know, I haven't studied his life closely. But he is one of the leading authors of what I would call counterfeit Christianity, right? Where you're looking at everything in the gospel through a very negative lens of arbitrariness, as opposed to our reading, which is in the Ten Commandments, God is only revealing the rules of the game that are already hardwired into our human nature, right? He's just telling us, it's the instruction manual. You know, if you have a computer, it says, one of the things it says is, don't immerse it in water. Have you ever read that, like about a printer or a computer, right? You know, they have to put that in the thing because you can't figure that out on your own, right? Of course it's not going to work well if you put it in water because the whole thing will short out, right? And you have to go buy a new one, right? That's how we understand the Ten Commandments. But that other way of thinking is that rules are more arbitrary and that they're merely expressions of power. They're not a communication from a good coach or a good father who wants us to have a great life and recognizes if we drive the car off the bridge when it says bridge is out, car's not going to work really well after that, right? So we need to kind of know what are the really serious things to avoid, right? So that's a short answer of where counterfeit Christianity comes from. You'll find this commonly in Calvinism, if you know some of the other Christian strains. Some of the other Christian denominations will have a more negative or a more positive view of human nature. Calvinism is a strong example of a lot of people are just bad, right? Which doesn't really make sense if Christ came to save what was lost, right? It implies there's something good worth saving, right? And he wants to bring us home, right? So Jared, great answer, great question. Hopefully an adequate answer to your question. Other questions? He wants to ask it, but he's not sure if he's going to ask it. Is it a funny question? Maybe not. Maybe he's just making a joke at the table. Which is, I'm sorry?
Who was Hobbes?
Who was Hobbes? That's good. So speaking more philosophically, right? right? Actually, here's a helpful way to think, right? One of the things that Pope John Paul II taught is that as Catholics, we have a very interesting way of thinking about the human person. We hold a middle path. There are some people that think everyone is bad all the time. A famous quotation from Thomas Hobbes is, "Man is a wolf to man." The natural state of the human person is to be constantly at war, right? On the other hand, a kind of contemporary of his, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, would say people are naturally good, and it's only because of how they're raised that they get corrupted, right? So this idea that everybody's mostly bad or everybody's mostly good, we don't hold either one of those particular ways of thinking. We hold this middle view that we're created good, but we're also, we experience disorder. We make mistakes, right? And we do need redemption. And so that's kind of a middle path, but with a good foundation, right? I don't know if that's enough history on Thomas Hobbes for... so that it's helpful to think that way, right? Because you will meet people who are like, yeah, you know, it's all about society's just bad, and people would be good if we just didn't have society. It'd be like, oh, that'd be interesting. Like, how would we decide which side of the road to drive on if we didn't have society? Not so good, you know? But it's also not true that it's more natural for me to be enemies with you than for me to be friends with you, right? Friendship, we hold, is the more natural human capacity, right? Because we're fundamentally good, right? Yes, we have to worry about the handful of people in the world who are bad actors, absolutely, right? So be, what is it? Clever as serpents, but innocent as doves, right? That's what he calls us to. We need to be both. Other questions? Observations? Sir?
I think all y'all look really, really great in your shirts right now. Like, we are the twins. Nah,
No,
like, yeah.
Well done, sir. Well done. Well done. Well, I will tell you, one of my most difficult college classes ever was the one right after lunch when Dr. Neumeier was speaking in his low, monotone, wonderful man voice after lunch about some topic. And I can literally remember looking at him through blinking eyes in the right after lunchtime. So you guys were a very gracious audience today in the presumably after lunchtime. Thank you very much. Again, happy to take other questions later, but it looks like we're probably done for now, I would guess. Thank you very much. And thank you for the monitor. That was excellent.